genetic mutation. Whether it's a mutation that causes extra proteins, like in the lobster, a mutation that causes a deficiency in enzymes, like the jackal and badger, or mutations that affect melanin production, like with the snake and other animals like sea turtles, whales, elk, and zebras, real-life shinies, and by proxy Pokemon shinies, are all caused by genetic mutations that don't normally occur in nature. But that's only half the story. The other factor at play here, and the other thing that makes them so rare, is the fact that most of them don't survive to adulthood. Oftentimes, the same genetic mutations that cause them to be colored differently also impact crucial skills like the ability to see. For instance, piebaldism, which is the official name for the coloring pattern that we saw in that snake, is genetically similar to albinism, a condition that affects both humans and animals. In albinism, the body is unable to produce enough melanin. In most places, this doesn't make a significant difference. However, it also includes a lack of melanin in the eyes, where lower amounts of that pigment can actually affect your ability to see. As a result, a large number of people with albinism are legally blind due to how highly photosensitive their eyes are. Lower melanin levels also means paler skin, which in turn greatly increases the risk of sun damage. But unlike humans, in the animal kingdom, albino and piebald animals don't have the option of hopping over to the local Tesco to pick up some sunglasses and a tube of SPF 50. It's not just humans that have to worry about things like skin cancer and radiation burns from too much sun exposure. These things happen to animals too, and unfortunately, a melanin deficiency makes these animals less likely to survive. And that's without even mentioning how being bright white makes you much more likely to stand out to predators relative to your much more camouflaged brethren. Zebras have stripes because the vertical lines allow them to confuse predators when moving as a group, making it more difficult for a lion to identify a target. But if you look different from the rest of the herd, well, makes it easier for that lion to track you, making it that much more likely that you become the next meal before you can pass on your genes to the next generation. And the more unusual you are, the harder it is to survive to adulthood to pass on those genes. So, being an unusual color on the grasslands, not a great idea. You know where being an unusual color is helpful? In captivity. And here again is where we see video games imitating real life. Unusual colors make an animal a prize for collectors, which is not that different from shiny Pokemon. I mean, let's face it, there's nothing that screams throw a Pokeball at me more like being a rare color. There's a reason why people grind for hours to capture a shiny Umbreon, because it's rare, because it's a trophy, it's an accomplishment, and gosh darn it, it's cute like that brown little panda. So while being a rare color makes you much more likely to die a horrific, grisly death out in the wild, Pokemon or otherwise, it also means that an impressionable 10-year-old is going to be much more likely to save you from that horrific death by throwing his balls in your face, especially when you're compared to, like, I don't know, the 1 millionth Pidgey he encounters. Which brings us to one final and very unexpected comparison between video game shinies and real-world biology. As we just discussed, a lot of the color variants that we see in nature are genetic, meaning that they're hereditary, passed down from parent to child.
And I'll be working on drawing some fan art for Squirrel Girl, so if you like me see, feel free to join and follow.
And so, to some extent, the likelihood of you ending up with a different fur or skin color is dependent on who your parents are. That's not entirely true in the Pokemon universe. Two shiny Pokemon parents getting together does not increase the likelihood of a shiny baby. Unless you count Gen 2, where Pokemon shininess was determined by something that was called DVs in a way that hasn't been a part of Pokemon games since. However, if you're looking to breed a shiny Pokemon, there is one thing that you can do to increase the chances of a special egg. You breed using two parents from different regions. And I'm not talking different regions in the Pokemon world, like breeding an Alolan Raichu with a Galarian Pikachu to have a higher chance of getting a shiny Pichu. I mean caught in different real-world regions, or more accurately, different languages of the game. If you take a Pikachu that was caught in an English language version of the game and breed it with a Pikachu that was caught in a Japanese language version of the game, your resulting Pichu is 5 times more likely to be shiny than if you just bred two Pokemon caught in the English language versions. This method of shiny hunting is informally known as the Masuda method, named after Game Freak director Junichi Masuda, who programmed the mechanic into the game starting with Gen 4 and documented it in his blog. It's a lesser-known mechanic that was designed to bind international Pokemon communities together, encouraging you not only to trade Pokemon with your friends, but to make new friends with people who play the game in different languages and trade with them. Pro tip, by the way, if you got a friend who does have a different language version of the game from you, get them to trade you a Ditto specifically for shiny breeding purposes. The Masuda method seems to suggest that Pokemon that are more different from each other are more likely to produce a shiny Pokemon, that a Spanish Charmander and a Japanese Charmander have a special certain chemistry that makes them 5 times more likely to produce shiny Charmander progenitor offspring. But does that square with reality? As it turns out, no. In fact, it's quite the opposite. A lot of real-life shinies are the result of inbreeding. For example, remember the brown panda that I mentioned earlier? According to scientists who discussed the brown panda in Nature magazine, one of the most plausible explanations for the brown panda's origin is inbreeding, a lack of genetic diversity. As pandas become increasingly rare, there's less and less variety in the gene pool, and so it's harder and harder to find pandas to breed with that aren't in some way related to you from a few generations back. That whole lack of genetic diversity leading to a weird coloring is actually something that's happened in humans. The Fugates are a family that lived in the hills of Kentucky and were commonly known as the Blue Fugates, or the Blue People of Kentucky, because for many members of their family, their skin was literally blue. No, this is not Photoshop. No, this is not distorted in any way. This is the actual color of their skin. You see, they have a rare genetic trait that leads to the disease methemoglobinemia, which causes blue skin. The cause for this genetic abnormality? Well, for a period of about 200 years, the Fugate family was largely isolated from the outside world in a remote part of the Appalachian Mountains, leading to predictable lack of genetic diversity. Let's just say that their family tree looks a bit more vertical and less wide than you'd expect. As we've discussed, unusual pigmentation is usually the result of adverse genetic mutation, and as you're probably aware, birth defects become more common when the parents are too closely related. In short, the Fugates are a real-world example of humans that are shiny. It's actually a lack of genetic diversity that causes the sort of mutations that result in unusual colors. If the Masuda method were trying to be biologically accurate, breeding a Japanese Squirrel with a French one would probably have a reduced chance of producing shiny offspring. Luckily, this is the one part of the Pokemon game mechanics that isn't true to real life. So if you happen to be a shiny hunter, it might be worth your while to start making some international friends. If not, well, let's just say you're gonna wind up blue. Dabu-dee-dabu-die. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching. I don't know how it's been for you guys, but this winter has been brutal. I mean, sure, maybe it's the fact that this is my first real winter in almost a decade since I moved out of LA, but that doesn't make my numb digits any less legitimate, which is why I've been turning to today's sponsor, Audible, so I can keep my fingies snuggly while getting a head start on my New Year's reading challenge. Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks. They make it fast and easy to listen to everything from audiobooks to podcasts to guided meditations and more. And with thousands of titles to choose from, Audible is the perfect way to pass the time while your limbs thaw. No frozen fingers here, my friends. Those pages turn themselves in your ears while being read to you by expert voice actor reader people. Sure, that works. Speaking of passing the time, I'm actually revisiting the Lord of the Rings trilogy. All 54 hours and 6 minutes of it. Love the extra 6 minutes, which for a guy whose principal weekly reading is the FNAF logbook is no small feat. Nonetheless, I am determined to make my way to the top of Mordor and fist fight Ian McKellen or whatever. Sorry, I haven't gotten to that part in the book yet. If you'd like to join me on my journey there and back again, you can become an Audible member like myself and access 1 credit every month. Good for any title in Audible's premium catalog, which you can then keep forever. Members also get full access to the Plus catalog, with thousands of select audiobooks, podcasts, Audible originals, and more. You can get started with a 30-day free trial right now at audible.com/MattPat. That's audible.com/MATPAT, or link is right there down in the description below. Or you can just text MattPat to 500-500. Thank you again to Audible for sponsoring this episode, and also for sponsoring my New Year's resolution to be better read. And as always, folks, remember, it's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.
It's about listening to people.
I give my phone number out to everyone.
They tell me.
Alright. Next one. That's what we're doing. For those watching. Have you guys been playing Marvel's Rivals? Just saving real quick. Backing up my files.
The most controversial thing to happen in the history of Pokemon. More controversial than Sword and Shield not having the national dex. More shocking than the stories about people getting hit by cars while playing Pokemon Go. Even more unbelievable than the fact that Ash Ketchum just became a Pokemon League champion in the anime. Seriously, the claim I'm about to make will change the course of Pokemon history. I'm about to prove to you that all electric, lightning-type Pokemon, including everyone's favorite sparky little hamster Pikachu, are absolutely useless. And come at me all you want, but might I recommend not doing it with an electric type Pokemon, because seriously, I'm gonna show you why that would be super ineffective.
Let us do the heavy lifting with Walmart grocery delivery.
5 minutes ago, she'd never play piano. Can you believe she's been playing 1 week? And that's just 2 months. And him, 6 months playing with the Ridley method.
I think I'm gonna move that eye over a little bit, that piece of hair over a little
And
bit.
that's 1 year of playing. This is how fast you can learn the piano with the Ridley method. A new
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory! For once, the cold open actually cut right to the chase. I am, in fact, here to make everyone in the Pokemon community angry for probably like the 27th time since this show began. Maybe more angry than that time I discussed whether Jinx was racist for like 3 episodes. I won't even link to those because YouTube in 2012 was a problematic place, and my visual puns were even cringier than they are today. But if you're OG enough to have seen one of those and somehow stuck with me all these years, comment Hot Wings. I'm recording this episode while I'm hungry, so doing that will just help me remember that good old time that I was sitting here hungry in the recording closet thinking about Hot Wings. Regardless, today I'm here to dash a different set of dreams to demonstrate the absolute scientific uselessness of electric, or if you're a card game aficionado, lightning type Pokemon. These Pokemon include Pikachu, obviously, and his evolution Raichu, and then all those other electric types that only the hardcore Pokemon fans know, let alone care about, like Galvantula, Electrike, Xurkitree, which, let's face it, is literally just a pile of wires. I know that we give like Vanillite and Garbodor a really hard time here in YouTube land, but geez, look at this thing. It's got a plug as a foot. They didn't even give this thing a face. So for all of you who don't care at all about the bundle of cords in the corner of your computer room, you can just take everything I'm talking about and just apply it to Pikachu, the electric rodent that we all love. And even though we do indeed love him for just how gosh darn cute he is, I'm still here to tell you that he doesn't pack any more of a punch than that freshly laundered towel that gave you static shock when you grabbed it out of the dryer. How could this be possible, you say? Since we see him coming through for Ash with lots of cool lightning moves all the time, like this one. And even more so when you get to his evolved form Raichu. It's his evolved form. He should be more powerful than he already was, right? Well, okay, let's start our discussion today by talking about Raichu. Raichu, Pikachu's cooler, oranger evolution that failed to capture everyone's heart like Pikachu, relies on his signature Lightning Bolt moveset when he charges up his cheeks, then kind of blows out a big lightning bolt that, to his credit, seems to deliver a pretty decent wallop. According to Raichu's Pokedex entry in Fire Red and Pokemon Sun, as well as episode 14 of the anime, Raichu, quote, unleashes electric shocks that can reach 100,000 volts. And that seems like a huge number, right? Like 100,000 of anything must pack a big punch because there's just a lot of zeros in that number. And then there's volts. Volts, those are like the magical electricity pieces, right? And we don't really know anything about electricity other than it's pretty zappy, so a lot of volts must mean Raichu is basically deep frying any Pokemon who stands in his way, right? Well, slow down there, my little Excel gore, because it turns out science is not on Raichu's side. Like, really not on his side. And to understand just how shockingly mediocre Raichu's shocking power set actually is, I need to school you, and apparently everyone at Game Freak, about how exactly lightning works. First thing to know is that shooting lightning at someone is not like shooting anything else at them. Water Pokemon shoot water, fire Pokemon shoot fire, grass Pokemon are stirring up leaves in a menacing way, I guess. All of that makes at least some level of basic sense because those are all objects that you can actually shoot at someone. But can you actually zap someone with electricity from a distance?
Yes.
Not really.
Why not?
Even with electric weapons that we currently have today. I mean, think about how a stun gun works. It works by shooting wires at people, and it only works if there's a physical connection between the target and the stun gun. Similarly, a taser only works when you hold it directly against someone's skin. So in light of that, it seems only fair to question this idea that you can shoot lightning bolts at people, or in our case, other anthropomorphized keychains. How do electric Pokemon movesets work exactly? And more importantly, what does science actually tell us about how strong these electric attacks should be? At first glance, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with electric type Pokemon. They shoot electricity out of themselves just like lightning, and lightning is a real thing in the real world. We know it can strike from a long distance, so a lightning bolt between Pikachu and the nearest Bulbasaur should work in largely the same way, right? Well, not when you look at what lightning really is. To put it in scientific terms, lightning is an electrostatic discharge that occurs between 2 points that have themselves an electric potential difference. Nerd! For the non-textbook definition, let's look at an example, shall we? You know how batteries have one end that's marked positive and the other end that's marked negative? And how if you put the batteries together, you need to put them all facing so the negative end of one battery touches the positive end of the next battery? That's because in order for electricity to flow, there needs to be what's called an electric potential difference, which in the case of batteries is a difference in the charge, negative or positive. At the negative end of the battery, there's a buildup of negative charge, which is why it's called the negative end. Pretty obvious. I've always found it confusing that the negative end of the battery is where all the charge is, because negative always makes you think of not having enough of something. But remember, in electricity, it's the opposite. Since electricity is talking about the flow of electrons, and electrons have negative charge, where those electrons are built up is where the things are gonna start. Makes sense, right? Electric charge always starts from the biggest pile of electrons, the negative end, and flows to the positive, from where there's a lot of charge to where there's less charge, until all the extra negative charge has spilled over into the positive areas and everything winds up neutral. That's when your batteries run out. All the negative charge has flowed toward the positive end of the battery, and there's no more difference between them anymore, and the battery gets thrown out, or more accurately, recycled safely. The difference between the negative end of one battery and the positive end of the next battery is called that electric potential difference. The shorter, easier way to say electric potential difference, by the way, is to say voltage. That is what volts are. So when you hear me talk about how many volts something has, volts aren't a thing that you can hold in your hand or toss around. It's just the difference between the electric potential of two things. The greater the voltage difference between two objects, the more easily that electricity is going to be able to flow between them. And just like water flows down a steep cliff more easily than it flows down a little slope, electricity finds it easier to flow when there's a high voltage difference. Higher volts means a steeper slope, if you're using that water analogy. You can actually see this play out in practically every lightning storm. During a storm, negative charge builds up on the bottoms of clouds, making it polarly opposite from the positively charged ground below it. Sometimes, like during thunderstorms, that potential difference between the negatively charged cloud and the positively charged ground becomes so big that it's able to overcome the resistance of miles of air. And that brings up the question of what I mean by resistance. Well, the air all around us has a lot of molecules, and each one of them has to become supercharged to carry the lightning bolt through the air. And it turns out that air doesn't want to randomly become lightning, which is pretty darn good for us, but it also means that the lightning bolt has to overcome a lot of resistance to get the air to charge up enough to carry that bolt all the way down to the ground. In order to overcome that resistance, you need a huge voltage difference between the clouds and the ground. How big a difference we talking about here? Like a billion. Unironically, not even joking, about as high as 1.3 billion volts, if we
That
want
is
to be
crazy.
exact about it. At high enough voltages, the air actually becomes ionized and becomes plasma. That's the fourth state of matter, ladies and gentlemen, after gas, liquid, and solid. The air actually stops being a gas and becomes an entirely different state of matter. So, you can imagine how much energy that's gonna take. That's what's going on every time you see a bolt of lightning in the sky. The reason that potential has to be millions or even a billion volts is that the resistance between the points is so big. Tall objects, like trees, are more likely to be struck by lightning because there's less distance between the cloud and the top of the tree than there is from the cloud to the ground. So the electric potential difference required to close that gap is smaller. And since the electrons are looking for the path of least resistance, well, they're gonna take it if they can. So could an electric Pokemon strike its foes by summoning lightning
That's
from
crazy.
the sky like a thundercloud would?
I'm just gonna
Not
save
even
real quick here.
close. Remember, lightning strikes can have voltages as high as 1.3 billion volts. And even small lightning strikes carry voltages in the hundreds of millions range. Consulting the Pokedex, we're reminded that Raichu, the stronger, more evolved form of Pikachu, can only reach at most 100,000 volts. That is 0.01% of the voltage required to pull off a large lightning strike that could travel from the clouds to the ground. How far will 100,000 volts carry you? Well, it takes around 30,000 volts per centimeter to jump a gap of air that hasn't been ionized. So, if we're using Raichu as baseline for what a typical electric Pokemon should be capable of, that 100,000 volts is only going to be enough to jump a gap of 3.33 centimeters, or just 1.3 inches. That's some close quarters combat for a Pokemon battle. And what's even more concerning is that even if Raichu is standing right in front of another Pokemon, the only one who's really at risk of getting electrocuted is himself. Wait, what? How do we go from Raichu shooting lightning to Raichu electrocuting himself? Well, the thing about lightning is that we don't actually decide where it goes. It just always will follow the path of least resistance. Targeting your lightning strike like you see in Pokemon battles, or heck, like you see in Star Wars, does indeed look awesome, but it actually defies everything about physics and how electricity travels. The truth is that lightning just strikes the closest thing with the least resistance. And in Raichu's case, that's likely just gonna be himself. Looking at the way Pikachu and Raichu's power sets work, the charge they build up canonically comes from these two little cutesy spots on their cheeks. They somehow turn those two spots into the negative end of the battery, supercharging them with lots of negative ions before shooting that negative charge out at their opponent. But the problem with that is when your cheeks are negatively charged and the rest of you isn't, then the closest positively charged thing is just still gonna be you yourself. To understand why that's the case, we need to go back to this idea of resistance. Like I said earlier, sending electricity through the air is really hard. Again, this is lucky for us because it means we're not getting zapped every time a breeze blows, but it also means that electricity would rather travel through pretty much any other object before traveling through the air itself. Metals like copper or aluminum have a very low resistance, for instance, which makes it really easy for electricity to travel through them, and which is why we use metal wiring for our electronics. If you use a professional resistance meter to measure the resistance of aluminum or copper, it'll read almost 0 ohms, which is the official unit of resistance. Try something else though, like say a piece of steak, and you're gonna see it register several thousand ohms, slightly more resistant to getting electricity.
Just save here real
easily.
quick.
It's gonna default to the metal, but
We're
in
gonna
a pinch, it'll
continue.
go through the steak. Measure the
Save as a
resistance of the
copy.
dry area on the outside of your skin, and it's even higher still, at least
Gotta back up my work.
100,000.
We're almost done
So
the
again,
face, actually.
electricity is going to choose a lot of other things before it wants to travel through that
So that's
dry
saved real
of your
quick.
skin. Now compare all of those to air, which is an insulator, meaning that it's particularly bad conducting electricity. While the resistance of air can vary a lot because the water level in the air can
Let's
change,
zoom
you're
out here.
talking in the realm of billions to tens of billions of ohms of resistance. It's not even a contest. If electricity can go through almost anything else, it's going to do it.
I should
So
put
taking this to
love
the
nuts
logical
on here.
conclusion, if Pikachu or Raichu builds
That
up a
reminds
big
me.
negative charge in their cheeks, creating a big voltage difference between themselves and the ground, well, the path of least resistance between the cheeks and the ground is going to be just...
Do a quick little drawing. I remember to change it later. Okay. This is rough. We'll fix it up later. But don't forget. Squirrel Girl, everybody. Alright, we're gonna finish up here.
through its own body. I don't see either of them wearing a big old pair of insulating rubber booties, so the path of least resistance for every single lightning attack is just straight through the rodent's own self. Now, sometimes Pikachu decides to leap up off the ground to perform his attack, so now he's closer to his opponent than he is to the ground, which honestly is a smart move and the only way to scientifically avoid striking himself with that lightning. But any part of him that's not negatively charged would still absorb all that lightning power before it ever reaches his opponent. He is literally just frying himself with every attack, but hey, at least he still looks cute, right? But you know what? Even I'm not heartless enough to want to see him fail, so what if we give him the ultimate benefit of the doubt and said that he could still manage to lightning strike another Pokemon, sending electricity through the air and hitting that other Pokemon on the battlefield. How strong would a strike like that be? How much damage would that lightning be doing? Well, it turns out that we can actually calculate that. The strength of an electrical strike is measured in amperes, or amps, not in volts. Remember, volts aren't a thing that you can hold in your hand. A volt is just the difference between two electric charges. The strength of the shock all depends on the amps, and there it doesn't take much to do a lot of damage. A shock as small as 10 milliamps or 0.01 amps is going to be a shock that you're going to feel, and a shock of 200 milliamps is fatal. So can Pikachu cause that level of real damage? To figure out the strength of the shock, we need to use the equation for amps. Amps are equal to volts divided by resistance. So amps is going to equal volts divided by ohms. When the volts are high and the resistance is low, like say Pikachu were sending those 100,000 volts down a wire with almost no resistance, well, we're going to get ourselves a big old wallop of electricity. Really high amps, super effective damage. But if he's sending that 100,000 volts across the air at 30,000 ohms of resistance per centimeter, well, that shock isn't going to be very strong for very long. In a typical Pokemon battle, Raichu is standing all the way across an arena from his opponent, so let's say conservatively he's like 10 feet out. To send 100,000 volts that far, it has to get through at least 9.1 million ohms of resistance, which means the shock that hits the other Pokemon is going to be at absolute most 0.01 amps, about the shock of a nasty doorknob spark. Ooh, that's some violent static electricity, but it's not going to be nearly as bad as if you accidentally stuck your finger in an electrical outlet. So, you see, volts have almost nothing to do with the strength of a shock when it comes to sending electricity through the air. The resistance of the air is the thing that's ultimately hindering the strength of that attack. Now, as one last and final thought, if Raichu and Pikachu and other electric-type Pokemon weren't dependent on lightning strikes, then they'd all of a sudden be in a totally different position. If Raichu were able to deliver the same voltage over a wire connecting him to his opponent, all of a sudden he's not worried about the electrical resistance in the air. Ionizing air molecules, that whole thing. Now, all of that charge suddenly goes straight from his cheeks down the wire and into the unsuspecting Squirtle across the arena, where the shock would be so strong that he wouldn't just be knocked unconscious, he would die almost instantly. The long and short of what I'm saying here is that the strongest move in an electric Pokemon's tool set isn't so much the lightning strikes, it's the ability to bite their opponent, break the skin, get down to that soft, squishy interior flesh, and then deliver that Pokemon the shock of their lives. Too bad Ash didn't pay attention in physics class, or otherwise he would have been completely unstoppable. As it stands though, now you know the reason how Ash is able to survive getting electrocuted week after week after week. Truly shocking. And speaking of shocking, special thanks to this episode's sponsor, Honey. Honey saves you a shocking amount of money on everything that you buy online.
I'm pretty sure you guys all heard
time.
about the scandal with Honey. It's so funny.
To do anything about it. I mean, look at how easy this is. I want to buy this thing, right? Boom! Honey notification pops up saying, hey, you're about to overpay. We found a way to save you cash. Click this and get free money. See, this is technology reaching its true purpose. Saving me money. That is why over 10 million people have downloaded Honey. 10 million! Almost as many users as there are Pokemon in the Pokedex. Definitely feels that way at this point. So if you want to jolt you on your shopping into high gear for the holidays, download it now at joinhoney.com/MattPat. MATPAT. It only takes 2 clicks to download and install. Maybe you've been invited to an ugly sweater party. Well, Honey can save you money on that. Need to find the perfect white elephant gift for your holiday office party? Honey can save you money there too, which means Gary in accounting can get the jumbo-sized lava lamp, which in all seriousness is actually my go-to white elephant gift. How awesome is getting a lava lamp as part of a white elephant gift? It's funny, it's trolly, but it's also kind of a guilty little pleasure. Like, you're kind of like, well, I got it for free. Might be fun to keep. You bet it's fun to keep. It's an effing lava lamp, and you can save a couple bucks on it by, again, using Honey. And while I'm on that topic, my apologies to everyone inviting me to parties this year. You know what you can expect. And finally, maybe you're given the best gift of all, a gift to yourself. Well, Honey can definitely save you there too, because it can find coupons for thousands of stores from Best Buy to Amazon to H&M to Pizza Hut. No need to choose who's gonna get gifts and who's gonna get left off the list this year, because you're saving money on everything that you're buying. So download it right now. It only takes 2 clicks to install. That's joinhoney.com/MatPat. MATPAT. Jumbo lava lamps for everyone! Hello, Internet. Welcome to Game Theory, the show that's like Team Rocket, always ruining things for people who are just trying to have fun. Oh, and real quick before we get started on today's episode, as I've been seeing more comments about this a lot, there's a new Game Theory video uploaded at least every weekend. With all the changes that are happening to YouTube, it seems like more people haven't been getting notifications, so either ring the bell to make sure that you get those notifications, or just check in on the channel every Sunday, because I've been cranking out videos all the time. And then usually every other week, Austin does a science video. And then I'll pop in with the occasional Matt chat in the middle of a week. But for the most part, if you're looking for Game Theory, it's every Saturday or Sunday. And I do mean every Saturday or Sunday. Now then, with all that business out of the way, for today's video, I have one question for you. Are you ready for a ghost story?
Yes.
Because for a series all about happy-go-lucky romps alongside your favorite sapient ice cream cone, Pokemon has some really scary themes. Themes that most of us just gloss over in our quest to be the best like no one ever was. I mean, sure, by this point we're all familiar with the hauntings of Lavender Town and creepy Pokedex entries, but those are just scratching the surface of the horrific tragedies that hide inside these games. The world of Pokemon has a shocking number of ghosts. And I'm not talking about Gengars and Ghastlies. I'm talking about real children dying. Throughout the series, we see repeated instances of ghost girls. Out of nowhere moments where you're walking along hunting for your next shiny Magikarp when the next thing you know, the girl you were standing next to fades away, or just straight up pulls a Batman and disappears. And it's always a ghost girl for some reason. I don't know why. Apparently Game Freak thinks that it's really creepy for a ghost girl to come up and say, "You're not the one." Joke's on you, Game Freak. Growing up, that kind of rejection happened to me all the time. And those girls weren't even dead. While you're playing the game, these are the moments that make you stop and go, huh, that was weird, before immediately seeing a berry and continuing on your merry way. As a result, the stories behind these ghost girls have remained largely a mystery. Little
That is
bits
so
of
true.
lore that are just waiting to be unearthed by the trainers who are willing to post
That Sabrina
their next gym
episode
badge and
still
instead explore off
freaks
the
me
beaten
out.
path. So today, I want to start piecing together these mysteries, starting with the OG, the original ghost, the marvelous bridge girl from Pokemon Black and White. Think back to Generation 5 of Pokemon, a trip back to the Unova region. In that game, when you visit the marvelous bridge that connects Nimbasa City to either Black City or White Forest, you'll catch sight of a girl who vanishes like a ghost if you get too close. And no, that was not just a sprite glitch. The NPC standing next to her immediately reacts, saying, "Huh? What? Did she just disappear?" If you explore the area near where she appears and head to the bridge's eastern gate, you'll find an old lady who will tell you that a young girl used to play around the area with an Abra before the bridge was built. And that was it. At the time of this game's release, those were really all the clues that we ever got as to who she was and why she was there. Just an odd little Easter egg of your casual run-of-the-mill bridge ghost. But the ghost girl would soon become part of a much larger mystery. While every other trainer moved on with their lives, in the years following Black and White's release, more and more clues started to leak out as to who this character might be. And to truly solve the mystery of the marvelous bridge ghost, we'll actually need to visit 3 separate games: Black and White, the sequels Black 2 and White 2, and the previous generation of games, Diamond and Pearl, all to uncover what really happened to this girl and why. In Black 2 and White 2, a new area becomes accessible, the Strange House. But strange is putting it lightly. In addition to being full of ghost Pokemon, when you explore the house, the environment will constantly change. Furniture will be rearranged, objects will shake, and it's very clear that this place is being haunted by something, or someone. Someone turns out to be a girl, who, when you speak to her, says this.
An everlasting dark dream. An endless dream of darkness. Dad, Mom, Abra, where are you?
Let's see, a girl in a haunted house calling out to her parents and her Pokemon Abra? Yeah, that sounds like it might be our girl. Her dialogue then continues.
In the dark dream, I heard my dad's voice. Forget about the lunar wing. Stay here with me.
And finally,
Oh, the lunar wing. I can't take it now, but it'll be okay. Please return the wing to the Pokemon. I was waiting on the bridge so I could return it myself.
A bridge, you say? Seems to me like this is our smoking gun connecting the disappearing girl on the marvelous bridge in black and white to the girl haunting the strange house in black and white too. After exploring the house, the girl gives you a key item, the lunar wing, and sends you back to the marvelous bridge where you can now encounter and hopefully catch the legendary Pokemon Cresselia. Now, all of that seems fairly straightforward. The girl vanishes and the story seems to be resolved, but it's just scratching the surface of what actually happened to her. You see, this ghost girl's entire tragic backstory was laid out for us by the developers, and we've just been overlooking it for the better part of the last decade. You see, by this point, we all expect games like Dark Souls and FNAF to not wear their stories on their sleeves, to instead hide the lore in nooks and crannies, item descriptions, and secret Easter eggs. But to solve the case of Pokemon's ghost girl, we're gonna have to do a similar sort of investigation. Scattered throughout the strange house are bookshelves, each one referencing some random fact about Pokemon or their moves. But when you actually stop and really read these entries and think about why they were put here inside this haunted house, you start to get a sense of the real story that the developers are trying to tell us. They all have to do with Pokemon possessing sleep-related abilities. First, there's an entry about Drowsy. Quote, there are Pokemon called Drowsy. They put others to sleep and eat their dreams. Eating nightmares can upset their stomachs. Next, there's an entry about his evolution, Hypno. Quote again, each one carries a pendulum that it can swing to make people drowsy. It's been said that a Hypno once hypnotized a child and took it away, end quote. We then learn about the move Dream Eater. With this move, a Pokemon attacks while the target is asleep and eats its dream. It restores HP equal to half the damage inflicted on the target. With all this dream and nightmare talk, is it a coincidence then that the girl's first piece of dialogue inside the house is
An everlasting dark dream. An endless dream of darkness.
Taking all that information into consideration, it seems like what the devs are trying to tell us is that the girl was trapped in an endless nightmare, and her parents were stuck on the outside researching every possible way to wake her up. That's why the books are scattered around the house. The parents were researching her condition. The bulk of their search was spent looking into Pokemon with abilities that could possibly heal her. Drowsy eating dreams and Hypno's hypnosis. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Drowsy probably tried to eat the dream, but because it was such an intense nightmare, he couldn't do it. The solution to their problem wasn't that straightforward. We know this through two additional books on the shelves that help us complete the puzzle. The first directly mentions the shadow Pokemon Darkrai. To protect itself, it drives people and Pokemon away with terrible nightmares. And the next entry is about Cresselia. Its wings shine like the crescent moon and keep nightmares away. So it would seem that the girl's inescapable nightmares were caused by the legendary Pokemon Darkrai. The girl is put into this endless dark sleep, and despite the family trying to get Drowsy to eat her free, the intense nature of Darkrai's bad dreams are impenetrable. That's why we also learn about Cresselia, as Cresselia's lunar wing is the only real counter to Darkrai's nightmares. Not only does the item description hint at this, we've actually seen it rescue a similar child in the past. If you rewind back to the previous generation of games, Diamond and Pearl, we meet Eldritch, a sailor who lives in Conolave City. Eventually, we learn that his son is caught in a horrible nightmare, a nightmare that also appears to have been caused by Darkrai. He doesn't say too much about the incident, except for one line. Dark is watching me. Even though he never says the full name, Darkrai is the only Pokemon whose name starts with the letters D-A-R-K. And the only way to rescue him is by using, you guessed it, the Lunar Wing. There's one other book in the Strange House that we're given access to, one that specifically calls out the ability Forewarn. Quote, a Pokemon with this ability is alerted to one of the opposing Pokemon's moves. High power moves will be recognized first. It's worth noting that Drowsy and Hypno are two of only 6 Pokemon who are able to learn this move, so it's definitely tied into this story, but how? Well, this seems to be the last of the missing pieces, and it tells us the order of events. The parents bring in either a Drowsy or Hypno to use Forewarn, or as it translates into the original Japanese, prophetic prophetic dream, and that move tells them what happened to the girl, what move a Pokemon had performed on her to trap her in this never-ending darkness. This, in turn, is how the father of our ghost girl knew to look into Darkrai's nightmares and ultimately Cresselia's lunar wing as the cure. The girl's second dialogue says,
In the dark dream, I heard my dad's voice. Forget about the lunar wing. Stay here with me.
It might be tempting for us to assume that the second part of the sentence is the girl telling us what her dad said. After all, she starts by saying that she heard her dad's voice. But if we dig deeper, it's clear that she isn't quoting her father at all. Throughout Pokemon Black and White, when a character's dialogue includes them quoting a different character, we actually see quotation marks. For example, when the player battles Chantal of the Elite Four for a second time, she'll talk about Volkner saying, "Do you know Thunderbolt was his first greeting to me?" Note the single quote marks around the words that Volkner said because she's quoting him. So when the girl says, "Forget about the lunar wing, stay here with me," she isn't repeating the words her father said. There are no quotation marks. This is instead the girl crying out to her father. Her father went out in search of the lunar wing, but the girl didn't want him to go. She wanted him to stay by her side, but she couldn't let him know that because she was trapped in this dark nightmare. And viewed in this light, this story takes an even more tragic turn. Maybe she knew that it was already too late and she just wanted her father to be there in her final moments. Or maybe she was just scared, and her father's comforting presence was the one thing that enabled her to persevere through the everlasting dark dream. So here we have the final and complete and tragic story of the ghost girl. We have a young girl, just like Eldritch's son before, who one day is stricken with inescapable nightmares. The parents don't know what to do, using Drowsy's Dream Eater ability to try and make the nightmares go away, but when that doesn't work, they use a Hypno with Forewarn to see what exactly is going on. Thanks to that move, they learned that it was the legendary Darkrai that did this to her, and that the only way to counter a Pokemon that strong was with the power of another legendary, Cresselia's Lunar Wing. The father goes out in search of the item that'll save his daughter's life, unable to hear her begging him to stay. By the time her father finally does return, though, it's too late. The girl's already passed on, unable to wake from her nightmares, and her father leaves the lunar wing in the room as a memento of the girl that he lost forever. The parents leave the house, and many years later, the house becomes overrun with ghost Pokemon, and the marvelous bridge was built, where the ghost girl wanders to this day, trying to return the unused lunar wing to the Pokemon that it belonged to. And that is the sad and tragic story of Pokemon's first ever ghost girl, who just simply started off as a randomly disappearing NPC. There is admittedly one big question here that I think remains unaddressed. We know that the girl was plagued by Darkrai's nightmares, and we know that her parents were unable to break the spell in time, but why would Darkrai do this to her in the first place? Darkrai's Pokedex entry indicates that it's not a malicious Pokemon, that it doesn't intentionally prey on the weak. It uses its nightmares as a defense mechanism. So why would Darkrai afflict this young girl who presumably posed no threat to it? I'm not 100% sure. It doesn't seem like the evidence is there. Eldritch's son in Diamond and Pearl was also afflicted, so maybe Darkrai just misses sometimes. In the movie, The Rise of Darkrai, it turns out that a girl's grandmother had met and befriended Darkrai, whose nightmares ended up helping them save the world.
It turns out that the nightmare told me just what I needed to do.
The nightmares were prophecies that ultimately helped avoid an apocalypse, so maybe that's the case? I'm not entirely sure. There doesn't really seem to be enough evidence there to make a judgment call. This is all just speculation. Honestly, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Help me finish up this theory. But there you have it, theorists. Man, Pokemon is not afraid to go there. And our legacy on game theory, making sure to cover all the games with all the dead kids, continues on. Speaking of, FNAF and Petscop theories coming up over the next 2 weeks. Again, we post every single weekend. Ring the bell for notifications to make sure that you are able to legitimately comment first. And in the meantime, remember, that is just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.
While you wait, can I offer you a snack? Oh, you brought your own Armstrong cheese.
Yeah, we always bring our own.
It's okay to bring your own Armstrong cheese.
You ever notice how Pokemon always say their own names? Yet whenever you encounter Mewtwo in the games, it always says Mew instead of Mewtwo. It happens in Red and Blue, it happens in the Gen 3 remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green, and it even happens in Pokemon X and Y. I think we all know the answer. Mewtwo is a clone of the original Pokemon Mew, and Pokemon always say their name, with Mewtwo just being the nickname the scientists gave it. But still, it's a very cool example of attention to detail. That said, it is pretty darn disrespectful to keep calling it Mewtwo to its face. Like, imagine if you had a human child named, I don't know, Amber, and then you cloned her, and then you started calling the clone Amber too. That would be pretty messed up, right?
They call me Amber too, but I'm still really Amber.
Adventures start
That's crazy.
with a hybrid you can depend on. But where those adventures end up, that depends on you. Meet the CR-V Touring Hybrid, in stock now.
Will I ever be good enough? I wish I looked like Taylor. Nothing looks good on me. I look ugly.
Life can be confusing, like no one understands the struggle. But there is hope. Find calm in the chaos at your local youth wellness hub.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, where we're just like Nintendo, constantly looking to make money off of old franchises. I mean, their first major Pokemon announcement of 2019 came out on January 1st, and it was a new Pokemon movie in the form of an old Pokemon movie. 20 years after its initial release, Mewtwo Strikes Back has now been transformed into Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. A CGI reboot with a name that's only slightly better than Mewtwo Strikes Back Revengeance and Mewtwo Strikes Back Mew 3. And I would be wagging my finger at Nintendo for the shameless retread if it wasn't for the fact that they had also just released Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, two games that straight up remake the campaign from the originals. Easy cash grabs abound. But of course, I had to play them. It is my job after all. It's a tough job, but someone's gotta do it. So of course, while playing through them, I was on the lookout for what new additions to the series they decided to slip in with this revisit to where it all began. Lesser emphasis on combat? Check. No random battles? Great. Girl who repeatedly pelts your face with Pokeballs? What? You see, in these new games, after you visit the Cerulean Cave and capture Mewtwo, you encounter a trainer by the name of Green. Her introduction to the player is, well, definitely not typical. The encounter starts with her throwing a Pokeball at the player. She quickly tries to play this off like an accident by saying, "Oh whoops, you're not a Pokemon, and it's dark in here." Fair enough, I too sometimes get startled and throw my balls at people in self-defense. But then she becomes angry when she learns that you've already captured Mewtwo. She battles you, and then after you win, she throws another Pokeball at you, and another, and another. 5 times she tries to capture you in a Pokeball. All this while making the odd suggestion of, why don't you become one of my Pokemon together with Mewtwo? Think about it, okay? Listen, the first time you smack me with a Pokeball might just be an accident. By the time this girl gets to her 5th Pokeball thrown at me, I'm gonna start wondering if there might be something slightly off about her. It's the sort of weird moment that tells me that there's something else going on here. So who is this girl? Who is Green? And what is her connection with Mewtwo? Well, it's my belief, as well as the belief of online theorist Ricky Grunt on Reddit, that Green is a clone. A girl who was raised in a test tube by scientists, all as a part of the Mewtwo project. Now, that might seem like a lot to assume from just a few lines of dialogue and a little bit of weird behavior, but the evidence is definitely out there. Birth of Mewtwo was a 10-minute origin story that served as a prequel to the events of Pokemon's first major motion picture, Mewtwo Strikes Back, and it was created to be part of the movie's US theatrical debut. Now, if you originally saw that movie in theaters and don't remember anything happening before the movie about a Mewtwo origin, well, you're not wrong. The whole thing was cut prior to release, and the only pre-show that happened before the movie was the short Pikachu's Vacation. Then, when the movie came out on home video, a heavily cut-down version that reduced its runtime from 10 minutes to 2 minutes made it into the final edit. It wasn't until 2001 that the full 10-minute prequel finally got a release without any cuts. The fittingly dubbed, uncut story of Mewtwo's origin. So that merits the question, what was too hot for Pokemon to handle? What was so controversial and traumatizing that it got cut not just once, but twice in movie releases? Oh, it's no big deal. It was just the story of the death of a little clone girl. Here's the story as told by that animated short film. Mr. Fuji, the guy who hangs out at the Pokemon house in Lavender Town and is best known for giving out Pokeflutes to trainers needing to get some Snorlaxes out of their way, was
gonna
part
say
of
one
a
thing.
cloning project to resurrect.
I know they have sensors and stuff for the better good of everybody. When I find out about all these sensors and things that they took out of shows were like very important to lore, it makes me kind of angry. It's like I did not know about that stuff. Kind of sucks that they take it out. Like I think that's very important information to keep in the story. So it makes me wonder why certain things don't make sense. They're like, oh, that's why that makes sense. Because they always cut things out in North America.
The Pokemon Mew. However, Mr. Fuji's motives for joining the project were a bit more personal than he'd let on, as he wanted to use the same cloning technology being used to resurrect Mew to also resurrect his own deceased daughter, Amber.
I must see my little girl smile again. Please let my theories be true.
Mr. Fuji here sounds a lot like me every time I release a theory. Well, except for the whole dead daughter thing. Now, obviously, in the short, the Mew clone is named Mewtwo, but it's not the only clone we see. Charmander 2, Squirtle 2, and Bulbasaur 2 are also there. Rounding out that roster of terrible twos, though, is Amber 2, who, in case you haven't noticed the pattern by now, is the clone of Mr. Fuji's daughter, Amber. Amber 2 is somehow able to communicate telepathically with Mew and all the other Pokemon clones. All 5 live in an unconscious state, trapped inside their own minds as they're waiting to be fully born. But because Amber 2 has the memories of the original Amber, she's able to share her memories of the outside world with Mewtwo and the other Pokemon clones, teaching them about life in the outside world.
I call this my remember place. This is where I used to live.
What is that?
That's the sun. It makes the whole world bright, and it keeps us warm all day.
For Pokemon that have never gotten to know life outside of a cloning tank, Amber's memories are the only taste they ever get of the real world. It's actually a really touching story. Until, of course, they decide to crush your childhood by teaching a theater full of kids about their own mortality. You see, Charmander 2, Squirtle 2, and Bulbasaur 2 don't survive the cloning incubation process, and ultimately fade out of existence. Which, let's just be honest with ourselves, is children's movie shorthand for those dead test tube clones gonna be flushed down the toilet. But if that weren't bad enough, the movie then does the unthinkable. Amber 2 fades as well.
Thank you for caring about me. And don't cry, Mewtwo. You're alive, and life is wonderful. Life is wonderful.
Which just leaves Mewtwo alone and in the darkness, the only survivor, sad and angry at the loss of his only 4 friends.
Please, Amber, come back. Don't go, please.
Watching this short story, it's really hard to think of Mewtwo as the villain ever again. So why bring this story up and sadistically torture viewers with what might have been the most heart-wrenching story in all of Pokemon canon? Well, I believe that Amber 2 from the movie is Green in these new games, Mr. Fuji's daughter, who was raised during the Mewtwo project, but unlike Amber 2 in the movie, Green actually survived.
Oh my god, the characters are so cute. Look, I got the star eyes too. And look at the little bear on the back. Oh god, this game's it's dangerous, guys. Whatever class you pick.
In the original Pokemon games, the Pokemon Mansion on Cinnabar Island is the first place that the player learns about the existence of Mewtwo through a series of journal entries. In the updated Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, though, you'll find more than just journal entries hidden there. Deep in the basement, there's a large tank. It's empty. According to the game text, quote, "It's a large container made of thick glass. It looks as if something has been beating on it over and over from the inside." And if that hint was too subtle for what's going on here, if you have Mewtwo as your companion when you're visiting the tank, you'll get this unique text. Mewtwo is staring ahead at the large machine. If Mew's with you, it's a similar story. Mew is staring quietly at the large machine. Given that this is clearly the tank where Mew was cloned and where Mewtwo was born, it would make sense that both of them would have a personal connection to this particular location. But here's the mind blow. Just past Mewtwo's cloning tank, you'll find 4 smaller cloning tanks, which precisely matches the number of additional clones that we saw in that Mewtwo origin short. A tank for Mewtwo, plus 4 more tanks for Charmander, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur, and the human girl Amber. And remember, these cloning tanks weren't a part of the original game. The developers went out of their way to add these very specific details back in. And while the green encounter in Cerulean Cave is certainly memorable, it isn't the only time that she's mentioned. If you go back and re-battle Gym Leader Blaine on Cinnabar Island, he'll have dialogue that specifically mentions her. Ha! Well done returning here to my gym. By the way, I've been hearing an interesting rumor floating around recently. You wouldn't happen to know a young lady named Green, would you? Well, it's not as though I really know the whole story anyway. And that's it. That's all he has to say. It's one of those weird half-clues that storytellers give you midway through the story to tell you that something fishy is going on, that Blaine has some sort of connection to this mysterious girl, but without them wanting to spell it out for you. But what could the connection be? Well, earlier Blaine says this. "You're the one who retrieved the key to this gym from the Pokemon Mansion. Did you see anything interesting while you were in there? That place still holds the remnants of my old friend's research." When he refers to the remnants of research, he's of course talking about the cloning tanks and journal entries. As for his old friend, well, that would be Mr. Fuji. This connection is made clear not in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, but rather in Fire Red and Leaf Green. The fame checker description for the Cinnabar gym photo explicitly says, quote, "It's a photo of Blaine and Mr. Fuji. They're standing shoulder to shoulder with big grins." This matches up with what we know from the anime. Remember, in the Mewtwo origin story, it's Mr. Fuji who's the lead researcher trying to bring back his deceased daughter Amber. So if Green is indeed this universe's version of Amber 2, Mr. Fuji's clone child with a connection to Mewtwo, it would make sense for Blaine, as a friend of Fuji's, to have a vague understanding of who, or more accurately what, Green actually is. Green has 3 distinctive features that are explained by her being genetically and psychically linked to Mewtwo. First, there's the fact that she knows where Mewtwo is, let alone that she even knows he exists in the first place. Remember, Mewtwo is a secret project, a Pokemon mega weapon. To everyone else in the world, including your rival, they only know vague rumors, saying things like, "There's talk going around about some crazy strong-looking Pokemon being spotted." If Green became friends with Mewtwo through her telepathic communication when they were both gestating clones, just like we saw Amber 2 do, that would explain why she's so enthusiastic about wanting to catch Mewtwo, why she wants to be reunited with her friend. It's also why she's so upset when she finds out that the player beat her to the punch. Secondly, there's the fact that she has both of the Mega Stones for Mewtwo, which makes 0 sense for just a random trainer to possess. As a Pokemon Pokemon who was lab created, items related to Mewtwo would also have to be artificially created. Green then would have had to have obtained them from someone connected to the Mewtwo project. And wouldn't you know it, but in the Pokemon Adventures manga, Blaine not only knows Fuji, but worked on the Mewtwo project, going so far as in the X and Y arc of that series, possess and use Mewtwo's Mega Stones. That in and of itself isn't conclusive of anything. The Pokemon Adventures manga follows its own canon. However, it does have a reputation for being more faithful to the spirit of the original games than the anime. According to the original creator of Pokemon, Satoshi Tajiri, quote, "This is the comic that most resembles the world I was trying to convey." And so if Blaine canonically has had the Mega Stones in the past, and in this universe actively knows about Green, well then we have ourselves a little line of possession for those very specific and very rare items. And lastly, we come full circle to the odd behavior that started this whole theory in the first place. The fact that she wants to catch you, the player, and tries throwing Pokeballs at you repeatedly. Seems like eccentric behavior for your typical human, but remember what happened with Amber 2 in the movies. If Amber and Mewtwo did indeed have a psychic link during the cloning process, that would mean that Green's first real friend would have been a Pokemon that she might have even had full-on conversations with, which, for an impressionable young girl with a troubled past, might blur the line between human and Pokemon, to the point where she actually thinks that she can capture a trainer if she uses enough Pokeballs. Mewtwo even struggles with the same question in the anime origin story, where Amber 2 seems not to care about the distinction between human and Pokemon.
Pokemon? Person? What are those? Which one am I?
Maybe it makes a difference to you if you're a Pokemon or a person, but not to me.
I don't know about you, but to me that sounds an awful lot like the laugh of a girl who might grow up one day to throw Pokeballs at people trying to catch them all. As for solid, conclusive proof, well, we might just have to wait until Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution to come out this summer. I wouldn't be surprised to see him mixing some of this lore into that one. But hey, that's just a theory.
Greetings, theorists. The gates beckon you. Are you prepared to meet him?
Okay, that's creeping me out.
3 symbols you must find. 7 + 7 + 7 must be eliminated, and the path to Ra shall open. Journey now to thetheoristgateway.com. He awaits.
Introducing the crossroads of power and efficiency, the new 2025 Civic Hybrid. Redefine your drive.
This episode finally solves the mystery of Pokemon evolution. That's it. No cringy opening joke, no nothing. If you want to learn the truth about what's really happening when Pokemon evolve and how it applies to us, well then, this is the video for you. Plain and simple. Roll intro.
The time is finally here. The gates begin to open. The pieces are in place for you. Use everything I taught you to solve my mystery. Your quest begins at thetheoristgateway.com. A prize awaits you at the end. Will you accept my challenge? Hurry. Time is ticking.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the self-proclaimed Garbador of the internet. With the release of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, it seemed like a fitting time to take a look at one of the most adorable Pokemon ever created. No, not Pikachu, jeez, that guy gets enough screen time. We're talking about Eevee, who's unique within the Pokemon universe for being the first Pokemon to have branched evolution, i.e. the ability to evolve into one of several Pokemon, starting with 3 options in Generation 1, Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon. And since Gen 1, the list of possible evolutions has just gotten ridiculous. You can now evolve into 8 possible Pokemon, ranging from alien cute to kawaii cute to eco-friendly cute. Since then, there have been other Pokemon who've gotten access to branched evolution, but to this day, Eevee is still the king. And so I started to research Eevee's unique evolutionary abilities, and then pieces started to fit together, and then more pieces, and more. Until finally, the entire mystery of Pokemon evolution lay solved before my eyes. That's right, Eevee is the key that solves what Pokemon evolution actually is. For years, we've made jokes of, that's not how evolution works, and clearly it's not. But we've never been able to put a label on what is really going on, at least until today. Today, we solve the riddle that is Pokemon evolution once and for all, and it all starts with this little guy. According to Eevee's Pokedex entry in Diamond and Pearl, Eevee is a rare Pokemon that adapts to harsh environments by taking on different evolutionary forms. If you squint at this explanation, it kind of seems to line up with the principles of evolution that were taught in school, where over time living organisms change their looks, traits, and abilities to adapt to their environments through Darwinian survival of the fittest. But the problem is that in Darwin's definition, this is happening over hundreds of generations. What's happening to Eevee is happening instantaneously when I shove a colored rock in its face. What we see happening in Pokemon would be like if I took a turkey to the North Pole, stuck it next to an iceberg, and suddenly it evolved into a penguin. While admittedly that would be really cool, and judging by how desperate Game Freak seems to be for new Pokemon ideas sometimes, it wouldn't really surprise me for a Penki or Turgwin to be in Gen 8. It's just not the way things happen in nature. So evolution alone isn't explaining how Eevee's physical changes are happening. But believe it or not, there is, in fact, a scientific explanation for Eevee, which is good because I like Eevee and we already wreck too many nice video game characters on this show. It's called epigenetics. Epigenetics is something that you don't usually get into unless you're majoring in this stuff in college. So all you younger viewers, get ready to blow your teachers' minds when you drop this knowledge bomb in the middle of your lesson about Punnett squares. Those are so like 4 years ago on this show. So what is epigenetics? At its core, it's essentially the phenomena by which animals are born with one set of genes, but potentially have parts of their DNA that are locked at birth and can later be unlocked by certain things happening in the environment. If that sounds weird, think of it this way. You have a ton of DNA in your body, 2.9 billion base pairs, but not all that DNA is working all at the same time. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of genetics, your cells have specialized proteins that turn off and on different genes throughout the course of your lifetime. When you're a kid, you have a ton of genes turned on to do things like grow your bones, build your brain cells, and create the hormones that make you fall in love with literally every creature that you pass in the school hallway. Later in your life, though, some of those genes get locked back up. When that happens, maybe your metabolism starts slowing down. You stop producing color for your hair, and it turns gray. As you get older, you have all the same genes that you started with on the day you were born, but how you look is depending on which ones are turned on and off. Your epigenetics. Right now, my baby Oliver has blonde hair, but Steph and I have brown hair. So, should I be worried about Steph's relationship with the milkman? Is Steph cheating on me? Of course not. At least, I don't think so. Steph! Steph, are you cheating on me? Oh, yeah, sure, that's what you would say. No, what's really going on here is that right now, most of the genes in Oliver's system that produce melanin, which turns your hair brown, are turned off. Like, way off. Just like I had when I was his age. But when he gets older, those genes get activated, and his hair will turn brown just like ours. His physical traits will change as his genes turn on and off. Now, with animals, what epigenetic researchers have discovered is that some animals will be born with one set of genes, but potentially have parts of their DNA that can be unlocked by certain triggers in their environment. A great example of this are honeybees. Yeah, I know, I just dedicated an entire episode to bee talk as it relates to Peachette. Maybe I'm just going through bee movie meme withdrawals, I don't know. Bees are fascinating creatures, and in this case, they are the perfect Eevee example. So, like I covered back in that episode, female bee larvae can grow into either a queen bee or a worker bee. What makes the difference here is the food that they're given at birth. Bees given royal jelly become a queen, while everyone else becomes a worker. So in this case, royal jelly is basically the evolutionary stone for bees, determining what form the larval bee evolves into. It even changes the bee physically, where, in their adult stage, queen bees and worker bees look way different, but in their larval stages, they're practically identical. It's exactly like two different Eevee evolutions that wind up with two different appearances despite starting with the same looking Eevees. The queen and worker bees didn't start off as genetically different, but differences in their environment, the royal jelly, or lack thereof, led to wildly different gene expressions. And bees aren't the only place in nature where this happens. Another Eevee-like example happens in the agouti mouse, which has a gene which changes the fur of its coat. These two mice are genetically very similar at birth, but due to differences in nutrition, they have very different gene expressions, with one having a gene expression that causes it to become obese and have lighter fur. Same DNA sequence, different phenotypes, all due to environmental factors. In humans, it isn't just hair color either. Case in point, diabetes, specifically type 2 diabetes. We're often told two things about diabetes that seem in direct conflict with each other. First, that diabetes is a genetic disease. If your parents and grandparents had it, well, it's more likely to be passed down to you. But also second, that poor diet and lack of exercise can be a cause of diabetes. So then, which is it? Is it a genetic thing that you're born with, or is it a condition that you develop from eating one too many solo Vermonster challenges at Ben & Jerry's? That is a dangerous prospect, by the way. Do not try to do a solo Vermonster. Oh, the Vermonster, you are so good, yet so dangerous. The answer is it's both. You might inherit a genetic potential for diabetes that's part of the DNA sequence that you're born with, but that diabetes may only get unlocked if you have the bad diet. And if you maintain a good diet, well, you might never have to suffer the diabetes that was encoded into your genes, as those genes remain turned off. On the other hand, someone without a genetic predisposition for diabetes might never get it, no matter how many Big Macs they eat on the reg. And this kind of epigenetics perfectly lines up with what we know about Eevee. In order to become a Vaporeon, for example, a Pokemon not only needs to be exposed to a specific environmental factor, in this case the Water Stone, but also needs to have the right DNA sequence. Your Pikachu ain't gonna turn into a Vaporeon no matter how many Water Stones you chuck at it. That's because Pikachu wasn't born with the genetic potential to become a Vaporeon. Well, Eevee was. You need both the genetic component, being born as an Eevee, and the environmental component, the Water Stone, to produce the epigenetic result, Vaporeon. And where this whole thing starts coming together is when you stop and think about what doesn't change here. The DNA sequence that you were assigned to at birth. It remains the same. It's the thing that doesn't change when these genes are being expressed. Epigenetic changes will cause you to gain or lose certain characteristics, but you'll still always remain the same species. A queen bee and a worker bee are always just gonna be bees. No matter what the fur coat looks like, that agouti mouse is always going to be an agouti mouse. As strange as it might seem, that stay the same species thing is actually the case for Eevee. Sure, exposure to a thunderstone will cause an Eevee to turn yellow and grow spiky quills and also somehow gain the ability to attack its foes with electricity, but if you leave it in a daycare with another Pokemon that loves it very, very much, it won't lay a Jolteon egg, it lays an Eevee egg. While Eevee and Jolteon might have different entries in the Pokedex, in biological terms, they appear to be the exact same species. The DNA sequence between the Eevee and the Jolteon has stayed the same. The only thing that's changed is what parts of the DNA sequence have gotten turned on. No matter how Eevee quote-unquote evolves, when it comes time to reproduce, it's always going to lay an Eevee egg. Sylveons don't lay Sylveon eggs, Flareons don't lay Flareon eggs, they don't pass their phenotypic traits onto their offspring. But what they do pass on is the genetic potential to express those phenotypic traits. Sure, there are a few exceptions to this, like how Rosalia can give birth to either another Rosalia or the tiny Badoo based on whether it's holding a rose incense. But this also ties in with another part of epigenetic theory, which is natal conditions, the conditions of the mother during pregnancy, and how it can affect their offspring. You know how pregnant women aren't allowed to do stuff like smoke or drink alcohol? Well, it's because those substances change the environment for the developing baby, just like a change in the environment for Eevee or a queen bee. This one is just happening before the baby is actually born. In the case of alcohol, a change in the baby's environment can cause birth defects. Birth defects are simply just another name for a change in the gene expressions of the baby. Really bad changes in the gene expression of a baby, but still, that is what it refers to. Basically, from the second you have genes, you can have epigenetic differences based on your environment. And here's where it starts to get crazy when you apply it to Pokemon, because epigenetics goes way beyond just the evolutionary family. This issue of the egg actually unlocks the evolution of practically each and every Pokemon across all of these games. What we've been calling Pokemon evolution for literally decades is simply just epigenetics. Take a look at any other Pokemon, Charizard, for instance. If Charizard was a true evolution of Charmander, when you bred two Charizards together, you would be able to get another Charizard. Charizard. Because animals don't regress backwards in evolution. Having 2 Charizards get together to produce a Charmander egg would be the equivalent of breeding 2 cats together and getting yourself a saber-toothed tiger egg, since at some point cats evolved from saber-toothed tigers, which would be the most awesome pet ever, but it's not the way genetics works. What this all tells us is that the basic DNA of that Charizard is still just a Charmander. Turning into a Charizard was only the gene expressions inside that Charmander changing. Certain genes for big scary fire-breathing dragon monster got themselves turned on, and the environmental trigger that did it wasn't a stone, like in Eevee's case, but here it was battling. It was being forced to battle a lot in order to level up. And this is where all the pieces start coming together. You see, being forced into stressful situations, like a fight to the death, or I suppose a fight to the faint, is exactly the kind of thing that can affect the methylation of your genes and in turn affect how your body develops. Studies conducted on lab rodents demonstrate how exposing rats or mice to stressful and threatening situations can affect the phenotype that their genes express. According to research done at Columbia University in New York, where rats were exposed to aggressive social interactions, i.e. a much lamer version of a Pokemon battle, in situations where the rodents were repeatedly defeated by larger, more dominant mice, some animals responded to the challenge by becoming more threat avoidant, which is a reasonable survival strategy. But another strategy was to rise to the occasion by becoming stronger and more threatening, almost like they were leveling up and gradually becoming stronger, unlocking more and more of their genetic potential. Epigenetic theory even goes so far to explain why it's so hard to find upper-tier, higher evolutionary forms of Pokemon out in the wild. Why is it so hard to find a Blastoise swimming around, or a Venusaur tromping through the grass? Well, there are costs to being big. Bigger beasts need to carry a lot more weight, meaning that they need to have proportionally stronger legs and eat a lot more food. There's a reason why there's so many more termites and ants in the world than elephants and rhinos. But if a wild Squirtle is just gonna live a peaceful existence out at sea, having a small body that requires less food to maintain is actually gonna be a lot more evolutionarily advantageous. However, if that Squirtle suddenly finds itself caught by a trainer and forced into a battle for its survival, or a battle for its trainer's glory and status on a regular basis, then what becomes most important is how good of a brawler it is, making evolution into a Wartortle and eventually Blastoise the single best way to ensure its chances of survival. It was the environment, being captured and forced into battles by trainers, that forced the genes for giant turtle mech animal to turn on inside a Squirtle, when in the wild, those sorts of genes would largely need to go unexpressed. They don't need them to survive. It's epigenetics in action. So there you go. You are now equipped to go around obnoxiously correcting your friends when they talk about Pokemon evolving. You could say something like, well, actually, Pokemon simply alter their phenotypic gene expressions through epigenetic signaling in their environment. And congratulations, no one will know what it means but you and me and all the other loyal theorists out there. But in the process, what we'll all understand is that what we've unlocked here today is a real biological principle that not only fits with what we observe in the Pokemon universe, but also fits the real models of how animals are born with unexpressed traits that can unlock when they encounter specific factors in their environment. It might seem pretty fantastical when you use a leaf stone to turn into a Leafeon, but it's no different from an agouti mouse growing yellow fur because of the nutrition it received. And it was all thanks to this little guy. Let's go Eevee, indeed. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching. Quick reminder, Game Theory merch is still available.
It's about listening to people.
I give